Добрый день, уважаемые.
Good afternoon, distinguished colleagues. We start our session. I would recall that its name is Impact on the Investment Climate on Finance and Economy of a City. My name is Andrei Sharonov. I'm a president of Moscow Management School Skolkovo, and I will be a moderator of our interesting session. I would start with introducing our participants. Please take your seats. Vladimir Yefimov, Deputy Mayor of Moscow in the Government of Moscow. Alexander Malach, Director for Regional Projects of Russian Direct Investment Fund, Head of the Center of Attractment of Investment to Regions of the Russian Federation. Tatiana Ritko, Deputy Director of Renault Russia. Alexander Pirozhenko, Deputy Director General of Agency of Strategic Initiatives. Maxim Tkachenko, Managing Director, Executive Director of National Center. Vyacheslav Tsibulnikov, Vice President of Sberbank, Chairman of the Moscow Bank of Sberbank, and Frank Shelf, General Director of Association of European Business in Russia. Such an interesting composition of panelists. We have 19 minutes for our session, and we agreed with our speakers that our major task is to be interesting for each other and for the audience. We have electronic voting planned, which is interesting, and I believe that it could be a reason for our discussion. Part of the conclusions which we will see on the basis of this survey, that is why I kindly ask you to download the portal of Moscow Financial Forum. Do you have the download app portal of the forum or not? If not, please download it. It will take just 15 seconds. It's available in App Store, Google Play, MFF, Moscow Financial Forum 2019. This is an icon which you will see, Moscow Financial Forum. Please download the app on your smartphones. I'm not sure. You can download it. You do not need any code, any password, and I believe that we will be informed the codes for the voting. First of all, I ask you to download the app. Anybody needs some assistance? App Store or Google Play, search for MFF 2019 app, then press download and open an app. Moscow Financial Forum 2019. Those who open the app, you see the survey button in the corner. Press this button, and the first question is code, and the code is 5055. 5005. Okay. Is it fine? And the first question to all the participants and all the speakers, please. Sources of information for each of you, which provide you with the most reliable assessment of the status of the situation with investment climate. You can choose the maximum 3 sources of those listed. Please, official statistics, reports of international organizations, specialized ratings, international advisories, analytics of leading mass media, surveys by business organization, and information from investors who implement projects. Which is the most reliable, which is the most important sources for you? Please choose up to 3 sources. You can see the results on the screen. Please continue voting, and I would ask our first speaker, Mr. Yefimov, Deputy Mayor of Moscow to start our discussion. On the one side, the topic of our discussion looks very simple, very ordinary, and the answer is absolutely undoubtable and obvious. Impact of investment. Obviously, it's positive, and there is direct connection between investment climate and the situation of finance and economy in a city. And of course, the situation with budget, municipal budget, and the companies which operate in the city. On the other hand, devil is in details. And I would ask Mr. Yefimov to tell us about that, about measures that the government of Moscow takes in order to improve the investment climate, which measures have positive results, which have negative results, which measures are the most efficient, and how Moscow looks in comparison with the most interesting international benchmarks, international cities. Mr. Yefimov, please. Good afternoon, distinguished colleagues. Thank you, Andrei. Talking about the policy of Moscow, city of Moscow, from the point of view of attracting investment, there is no any universal solution. Speaking about investment, we always think about the comprehensive ecosystem which covers all the areas, all the industries where entrepreneurs operate, areas, services which are used by the residents of the city of Moscow. Starting work to provide a positive and favorable investment climate, we focused on decreasing the number of administrative barriers. We transferred all the state of the public services to electronic form. Services provided by the municipal authorities, and by that we reduced the terms of rendering the services, and we made all the regulations transparent, especially regulations which describe our cooperation with the city, which had a certain impact on the feedback, on the assessment by the residents, by the investors. I apologize, but the topic you mentioned, large number of cities, municipal authorities, the rating takes place in all the Russian cities, in all the regions, and it demonstrates that the administrative pressure is one of the key reasons for lowering their place in the ranking. And inside the ranking, the federal regulators also have very negative influence. What do you think? How do you cope with that? We understand that the assessment covers region as a general. That is why we cooperate with our colleagues from federal authorities, and we are doing our best to solve all the issues appearing, not only with our municipal organizations, but together with representatives of the federal authorities. That is why I would not divide it by us and them. Of course, there are certain difficulties with transformation to electronic form. We did not finish it just because we do not have opportunity to provide all these services in electronic form due to technological opportunities of federal authorities. And I believe that it's a question of 6 months or 1 year. After that, all the services, especially in the city development, in the land relations, will be transferred into electronic form. Investment is one of the very important factors in the city. Investment in the sphere of real estate, first of all, and the key issue is connection to the energy supply systems. Within the frameworks of the projects of improving the investment climate, including in ranking of doing business, we decreased this term 5 times, and the same job was done regarding the water supply systems, and it's absolutely transparent. Cooperation of investment with the companies providing these resources is absolutely transparent and clear. And the ranking doing business, where the mark of Moscow, the ranking of Moscow is 70%, and the Russian Federation improved its results many times in the recent year. We work with investors, and we, of course, pay attention to the shadow sector, because it's always investment which we do not see. It's economy which is not visible for us, which works not to the common benefit, but for the economy, for the benefit for the revenue of companies or individuals. That is why we did a large-scale job to identify the markets of trade of such commerce, and we also work with construction companies, especially with the project which take too much time, and we focused on legalization, on the investment, and of course we need to make work of operations of these companies more transparent, thanks to our tax authorities, which did a great job, first of all, in the sphere of implementation of digital technologies in their cooperation and their collaboration with the taxpayers. And of course we understand that not less than 1/3 of this addition funds, which was revenue of Moscow, is a result of the cleaning of the company, thanks to the work of the tax authorities and to increasing of administration. Do you have any indicators? Do you have any metrics about the shadow economy? What was its share before these measures were taken and now? Percent, I believe that if we talk, maybe it was about 20%, and we decreased it 2 times. We have potential of further development and growth, but after introduction of the cash registers and taxation regulations, for example, for self-employed people, we can see that all these businesses are not in the shadow anymore. And this is not so important for the city from the point of view of determining the vector of development, but nevertheless, it's something that is necessary for us to make everything clear and transparent. And of course, the city development policy is another aspect. Within the frameworks of this policy, we focused on creation of jobs. Jobs mean source of financing, of revenue for the economy of the city. It's a source of new technologies. It's a place of attraction of new technologies, which of course reflects in the financial situation of both our budget and budget of the companies. One of the reasons decision made by us was to liberate all the commercial facilities which are located beyond the third transportation ring, and this is billion rubles, which stayed at investors, and we are sure this money will be invested in jobs. And what does it mean? How can we change it? What are the fines? We never fine anyone if we provide with the right to build on the land plot which already belongs to investor. Investor should pay a certain amount of money, the percent on the land cost price. Of course, it means commerce, it means jobs and development of economy, and during construction of these facilities, investors do not pay to the budget, and so self-cost decreases by 15 or 20%. And of course, we have special conditions for residential constructions, in case if it's the residential building which is built is for rent. If it's for rent, they have special conditions, and this legislation provides the regulation, the legal regulation of this construction, and I believe that in the nearest future we will see the results of the decisions made in the previous 2 months. Previously, we had a problem that the investors promised to build a house, to build a building for rent, but after that, using the tool of apartment, this residential house was commercial one. We will conclude an agreement, an investment agreement, which will provide for certain limitations on functional status of the building, and in accordance with the code, if this house is for rent, it will be impossible to sell it by parts. It will be blocked on the level of the federal legislation, which allows us to be confident that the building will not be sold by separate apartments. We do not block it for forever. If in the future an investor will make a decision that business should be reformatted, this investor will have an opportunity to pay a certain amount of money and to change the status of this building and to buy it as an ordinary residential building. And the next area which we are focused on is as follows. We understand that a driver for private investment is public investment. First of all, investment into development, infrastructure, including transport infrastructure. When we establish the budget, we always pay much attention to the budget of development. And during the recent years, the share of this budget was not less than 30%. We understand that our budget investment for creation, for example, for building of a new metro station, of the other transportation infrastructure, together with the Russian railways, for example, is Moscow central diameter. Each station is a new point of growth for business. And the station by itself, of course, it's investment, it's public investment, but everything that develops after that, some office buildings, commercial buildings, trade centers, is a commercialization of the infrastructure. That is why it's a driver for development of commerce, not only for the residents who have an access to the public transport. If we speak about the other areas, I would talk about all the areas of our projects. Incentives we provided in environment, introducing the mechanisms of incentives for technoparks, advanced economic areas, and this is again a driver of high-tech facilities creation, because one of the key criteria of incentives, of preferences, is level of salary. The higher the salary is, especially for the enterprises which take advantage of these preferences, should have the salary higher. And if it's higher, this means that the labor force is more efficient. I took part in a discussion in the Eastern Economic Forum last week, and many governors raised an issue that after providing a lot of preferences, a lot of intensives to the companies, they face the situation that the companies officially reduce the salary for the people who employed in that companies. In this case, all that incentive, all that preferences are not so efficient, and the jobs are not created as there should be, because it's not a benefit for the region, especially for the region and for the employees. Yes, that is why we have a criteria for these preferences. That is why the salary level is the criteria. If it's high, we understand that we have high-skilled employees, we have transparent jobs, especially in such a city as Moscow, and through this indicator we also have indirect assessment of what's happening. If the salary is very low, which means that the salary is not official, and probably the production is not very efficient. Why should we support something which is inefficient? Probably we should also consider added value to assess efficiency. I had this question because jobs is very positive.
But if we dig deeper, there is a question about the compatibility of number of jobs to the number of population. And Moscow has encountered a few times that creation of more jobs resulted in the opposite effect. So people had to be transported to somewhere, and they provided more problems than the city could resolve. So what is the case now? Again, the priority is highly skilled and a highly competent jobs. Again, what was said during the Eastern Economic Forum, the tax crimes are conducted using those benefits, but it's not only the profits benefits or property benefits. The other taxes are there, and we can see that 1 ruble of benefit would generate 5 more rubles of income. So for instance, if a state invests 1 ruble, 3 rubles are just invested by the private sector, or up to 8 rubles if subsidized. So the city acted as a co-investor for a private initiative, and as any investor, we want to get our money back. And the impact is high-level jobs, development of production facilities, as well as the revenue growth, including exports. As far as other ways to interact with investors, we have been actively introducing the private-public partnership, the lifestyle contracts, offset contracts. I'm not going deeper into detail, but we can see an impact from those contracts in terms of new production facilities as well as upgrade of existing ones. The city, going forward, will get the product independence in certain areas as well as saving of the budget because investors are more, how to say, effective using life cycle contracts. And in the long run, if we mean investment impact in comparable price for 8 years, they increased 202 times. And it's not only the Moscow budget that has grown pro rata, but individual enterprises would also win because they grew at a higher rate than Moscow budget. So it's all about investment climate. And the second point, it's a hard one. Yes, it is a hard question on the agenda. So this is a source of energy for the city budget, not only Moscow. Thank you, Vladimir. The last question in this part. What measures for support of investment climate development have failed, in your opinion, or have not given the impact that you wanted to get, and you stayed away from them, you changed your priorities? You know, initially, when we were looking for the investment climate support tool, we didn't just opt for one only mechanism. We wanted to make a range of things because we realized that one tool is not enough. That would be a not very effective system. I wouldn't say that there is a hit. Every measure worked out well in a certain aspect, and the colleagues from the Agency for Strategic Initiatives have put us on top of that investment rating. And that's what we want to do in the future, to expand our range of tools and to use existing ones. Thanks, Vladimir. I would like to give the floor to Alexander Gorozhenko, Deputy Head of the Agency for Strategic Initiatives. Alexander is one of managers who is in charge of the so-called famous Russian Regional Investment Attractiveness Forum, rating. Alexander, what do you think about Moscow and other regions? Well, here on the slide you can see the trends that Moscow was going along in this year to the first place. It was pretty, how to say, impressive. Last year Moscow took the second place, and in a hard fight with a very active region that has been actively playing on that market, which is Republic of Tatarstan. However, Moscow was ranked first. These are the main contributors to that. The first part of the table, you can see the comparison to average Russian metrics, Moscow versus the rest of Russia with regard to electric power supply. It's a big success, and Moscow has been leading way in that area in terms of power supply connection time. When we started the doing business rating, where this metric is among top 8 that countries are assessed in terms of their investment attractiveness and conditions for business. So together with Moscow government and Russian government have achieved certain success, and you can see that. it is quite a big portion of the rating. When we started that journey, there were so many letters and applications. It was the media wrote that it was not possible to connect to the grid, and now you can see that it's not a problem in the public field. However, the energy system load is quite high. Investments have been growing. New capacity is introduced. And Alexander, sorry to interrupt you. I would remind all the members that the rating is a survey among entrepreneurs in every region, so it's not a survey among public officials. This is a survey of users. Right. The regional rating is not an expert evaluation by a single company. These are metrics or scores across 40 metrics based on statistics and customer interviews. So today's rating shows that the trust towards the investment environment is number 3. Is the third point of our rating, investor interviews and ratings. Let's move on. The next slide. May I have the next slide, please? It won't work for me. We tried to correlate between a regional position in the rating and the per capita investment amount. The correlation is not high because the investment amount depends on many factors, but it is there. And you can see that Moscow, along with Tatarstan, shows that interdependence, and there is a leadership with regard to customer interviews as well as statistics. Alexander, what is X and Y axis? The X axis is the per capita income investment, and Y axis is the integral rating, the integral national index by that rating. So we decided to see the investment profile in Moscow versus London city. It's pretty comparable in terms of the number of populations, the impact on the world and global economy, and we can see that the investment profile is pretty near, including, well, it is nearly 100%. We can see that transport and telecom in Moscow has a bigger share than in London, 2 times bigger, because of an active investment program to build transport infrastructure. That came to my mind that Moscow and London would be even more looking alike because Moscow suffers from sanctions and London from Brexit. So you can see that the real estate and utilities municipal infrastructure, 4 and 14%, commerce and production. It's a service-based economy. It's a post-industrial economy. And we need to know that Moscow is not only a Russian city, it's a global city. And those metrics testify to that fact. And that shows that this mayor of Moscow policies are good. The next slide is a comparison of private and public investments in Russia and in Moscow. We can see that it's 2 times higher investments from the state. We didn't break it down by regional or federal, but federal budget accounts for the major part, and this is also because of a major transport infrastructure upgrade project. less private money, but we can also see that there is a higher share versus Russia, which is private-public partnerships that are more effective and active here in Moscow versus other regions of Russia with regard to the proportion of state and private investment. But the potential is huge. It is shown on that design with regard to foreign investments. So we can see that this is a global investment city. In Russia, it is 14%, but 24% of investment in Moscow. So those infrastructure investments should have private investments. It looks like Russia lives more in the market than Moscow with regard to private investments. However, it's not the case because the share of private investments in the regions is very small. That slide is showing, this is the last slide that I wanted to show. There is a correlation, there are results, and there is something to think about to use those opportunities. Thank you, Alexander. Please get your voting results back. Do we have it? Yes, we do. Nothing to comment on. You can see that we are still living in the paradigm that there is no profit in our country using foreign consultants. Second place, it's information about those who take part in the process, investors, and so on. Some official statistics goes next. Please vote for the second question. Please log on to the website and enter a code 3015, the Moscow Financial Forum website. You will see the next question, the second one. There will be 3 questions in total. This question is more subject-oriented. What do you think? Which areas would give the maximum impact for modern cities development infrastructure in the coming 5 years? You may select up to 3 answers. Let's move on. The floor goes to Maxim Tkachenko, Executive Director of the National Private-Public Partnerships Center. Maxim, we have mentioned that name a few times, PPP, and Moscow is gaining momentum. So what do you think? What place does Moscow take in Russia and globally in terms of public-private partnership and the best practices in the world? Thank you. I would like to continue Alexander's thought. Moscow has decided to analyze this practice since 2015. So the public-private partnership area is the first metric that Moscow takes since 2015 up to this year. This is the only metric that we have not changed. It's not dropped. Moscow has been staying on top in terms of public-private partnership. Why? We have to look deeper into the Moscow PPP market. The first interesting figure is that the overall private and public investments in Moscow is more than 650 billion rubles, and 7 times bigger than St. Petersburg and 15 times bigger than other regions that are among top 5 PPP players. But this is just a mere fact that does not describe anything. With regard to the correlation between investments to public-private partnership projects, one federal budget ruble has 10 private 10 rubles from private companies or individuals. So if we look at the forum and the cities or towns that are taking place in PPP, from the story that the financial partner is not a player up to the long life cycle contracts. Moscow has focused on those two things. The projects that are commercially interesting and they pay back, and they don't require budgetary support in Moscow because it's high density of population and high demand. And with regard to, it's all about, facilities for sports, for business. They can pay back by themselves. It's not the case in the regions because to start a concession for a swimming pool, we have to give 80% of capital grant because people in Moscow have more money and they can pay. The second thing is that when an investor can see a stable budget and have a partner that keeps his promise. So Moscow is a good partner in this area for electric buses, for metro cars. So investors know that they work with a reliable partner via third parties like unitary enterprises, like Moscow Metro or Moscow Transport Agency. Well, many ask why Moscow is compared to other regions, because Moscow is the richest region in Russia. However, it is not that simple. Back in 2015, Moscow was not among leaders, but it learned how to use that tool, and then that journey started 5 years ago. It is interesting to see why it so happened. 10 years ago, I used to work at the Moscow government at the economic department, and I could see that situation from the inside. The first concession that appeared in Moscow was a very caution thing. And if we look at the legal framework of that document, it was pretty debatable. But there were more important tasks, like to hand over for lease a big amount of state-owned property. And gradually, when we sorted out those massive products, we began looking into niche concessions, and they began shaping issues like, why does this big city need such tools? It's pretty expensive, it's complex, but it takes lots of skills. And that niche was just developed by the city, and the city said, I need skills. Moscow has enough money to build a road or a hospital, but Moscow said, I need a private partner to give me new skills or competences that the city is not having, and that was Moscow's niche. I wouldn't say that Moscow is a leader in PPP projects. The Amur region has 150 projects in municipal infrastructure because Moscow used to be and is still the richest to go there, but those who don't have money, they have a better look on public-private partnerships. That's why Moscow was a trendsetter for non-standard PPP projects like offset purchasing and the corporate shape that the transport hubs are now being built. So every region is trying to learn from Moscow, and many programs have been born in Moscow and then replicated in the country. So it's an example of Moscow, and it's no coincidence that Moscow takes the first place.
Может быть, там насчет
It allows us to have a center of competence. If we have such a center of competence without attracting additional advisors, for example, Moscow Center for Investment is a very serious structure which appeared at the same time when Moscow started to move on this road of public-private partnership. Application of these mechanisms in centers of competence is something that provides Moscow with the leadership in the ranking. And in the next 2-3 years, I believe that it will be very difficult to remove Moscow from this ranking. As far as I remember, the leader in Russia was St. Petersburg. From the point of view of legislation, yes, bases there the paid road started, and I would ask to show the results of the voting, please. On the screen we have voted on the second question. I would like us to have this information, and we will give a comment on this. And I would like to give the floor to Alexander Malak, Director for Regional Projects of Russian Direct Investment Funds, Head of the Center of Attracting Investment to the Regions of the Russian Federation. Alexander, question to you. Could you please compare your projects, your portfolio companies, which are related with Moscow and which are not related with Moscow? And the appetite of your foreign partners to the projects in Moscow and in other cities, if there is such a difference, what is the base for this difference? We work close with Moscow, and we have 22 projects now, where headquarters is located in Moscow. Partially it's federal projects, because our project is a large-scale one, and there are different projects, for example, projects of high-tech, promising startups, which are very small. And here all our projects of this type are also located in Moscow. We work very close with this city. I am involved, I'm engaged in projects which are really copying the Soviet governmental plans. It's a great honor for us. No, I not mean that I am that person, but our center, our fund has projects from all the country. We have some agreements that these projects will be introduced to us with the name of co-financing with foreign partners. These projects come to our organization. We cooperate with many regions, and it's very curious to observe that there is no correlation between the activities of the region in the sphere of attracting foreign investment and its wealth. There are wealthy regions which just do not care, and there are small but very active regions which manage to do miracles. Moscow is quite a successful example of rich region, wealthy region, and good results. Why? First of all, because there are a number of reasons. The capacity of market, foreigners, of course, are willing to be present here, and the second factor is that they know Moscow, they do not know about all the rest, and it's more pleasant for them to live here. Of course, it's obvious things which cannot be underestimated, and another important thing which we see in Moscow and which we do not see in other regions, as I mentioned, in wealthy and rich regions, the municipal government and professionalism of the people who work there. You don't have to explain why you need public-private partnership. People just provide all the materials in a very transparent and a very clear form. They speak the same language with investors, and it's an advantage, undoubtedly. If you talk about disadvantages, undoubtedly such a marketing activity in the region, which are active but not rich, is higher than in Moscow. In this regard, we probably could say about some proactive and reactive activities in Moscow with comparison with other regions. And I believe that in Moscow we have to fight not for investment. We do not have to compare with other Russian regions, but with our foreign competitors. We studied different experiences of agencies, of attraction of investment, investors in Toronto, for example, and it's proactive organization which attracts a lot of people who will not come to this organization in other case. In Moscow, the environment is quite comfortable. Foreigners look for contacts with Moscow, projects in Moscow, including, and it's a very important factor, because this project is their flagship of their presence in Russia. They say that if we implement it in Russia, we will start scaling it to the rest of Russia. And it's reality. It's reality of investment activities in Moscow. Thank you very much. I would like to draw your attention to the results of our voting. 3 leaders with almost same results: technology, smart city, digitalization and ICT development, transport infrastructure and advanced industry and high-tech. The next is education, scientific research and development, which makes me happy. I was surprised by the fact that the respondents did not notice the urban environment and the improvement of urban environment. Alexander mentioned that one of the critical factors of investment location choosing is the quality of life of the place where this investment takes place, and it's a very important factor, and it's again a very profitable situation for the economy of Moscow. And a small question to Vladimir. Alexander mentioned the importance of specialized agencies which are attracting investment, which compete not within the country but on the global level. For example, Canada, and a very good example, Tatarstan investment agency. If I'm not mistaken, they host about 300 official events a year, and 1/3 of them is with participation of the President of the Republic of Tatarstan. It's a very proactive position. Does Moscow have something like this? How do you work in this field? Of course, we have public agencies of management of investment, and Mr. Kostomarov is head of this agency, and the structure of this agency is dealing with all the investment proposals from the city. A package of projects, yes, a package of projects and proposals probably, which city is ready to offer to investment for cooperation. And of course we are not as active as Tatarstan, but nevertheless we are proactive in the sphere of introducing new mechanisms. After introduction of the mechanisms, we analyze its efficiency and we respond to the expectations of the investors in order to amend something. And our priority is not implementation of the pointing of the separated projects, but to create infrastructure. It allows us not to accompany every investment, but we provide the favorable environment and we monitor the work of investment, and this is how we amount our cooperation with this investment. In comparison with other regions, as in Soviet cartoon, there was a bright and many rooms. You have many investment projects that you could allow to host, to organize less events than other regions. And specifics, of course, we do not have as many land plots for the investment projects. As Greenfield understands that, and we do not have an opportunity to build, to construct many facilities. Our projects are aimed at modernization, at renovation of the existing. We do not have the petrochemistry to a certain extent. There is something which is being modernized. We have the automobile industry. We cooperate, of course, and there is food industry here. We have special conditions in order to improve the efficiency of the existing enterprises, and the investment structure of our city is different from investment structure of other regions which are also leaders due to the territorial specific features. And I would like to give the floor to the next speaker, and Vladimir, I would ask you to answer one more question. Is there a category of investors or projects or enterprises which you push, which you make, which you would like to leave because they are not, they do not, they're not in compliance with the criteria? I would like to give the floor to Tatiana Ridkova, representative for Renault Russia. How do you work in the largest city of Russia, 7 kilometers from the Moscow Kremlin, and what are the prospects of the automobile industry in the world, considering the global processes such as green technologies, etc.? Thank you very much for your question. In general, answering the question about the economy of the city and urban trends, I would like to expand on a number of areas which will be the subject of investing. I would like to agree with the audience which have chosen the spheres of the future investment. Number one is, first of all, industry, which is advanced, which is in development phase. Previously, the developed countries tried to move their production to the countries under development, but now the situation is different. We return production to large cities, but on a new technological level. This was the first area. Number two is municipal transportation mobility, because everybody knows about monopolization, increasing of number of cities. A person spends more and more time in transport. There was a survey in Europe and South America. The question was, what is the worst time during the day? And people said that it's the time spent, the worst time spent on the way to their work. Especially in South America, they spend about 5 hours sometimes. That is why efficient transportation system is the key factor, both from the point of view of business and other things. And we know about some interesting studies conducted by the foundations of the Saudi Arabia, which see certain menaces in, for example, consumption of oil products due to car sharing services. Large corporations start investing to non-profile areas of business or to the future competitors. For example, BP, Total, Shell, Chevron invest in development of electric infrastructure. IT companies start investing in transportation mobility solutions, and they will compete with the large automobile companies in the future. And the third trend, which is also very important, is also related with the transportation mobility, because a car is not a good, it's a service. Now a car is a smartphone with wheels. Of course, there will be further synergy with banking sector. There was such an interesting survey held in the US, conducted in the US, that the people who travel by car, they spend about $250 billion a year because they purchased petroleum, gasoline, and now you can do it using smartphone. But automobile industry is going to develop it together with the banking society. It's easy to pay with one click, paying for goods, paying for gasoline. When you need to purchase something, you just will have to go to your car without driving somewhere. Of course, there is Alexa, Amazon, or Yandex Alisa. If it's installed in the office, you ask a question, it's synchronized by a cloud with the car, and the car is ready to go somewhere where you need or where to buy a good in which location. All these technologies are under implementation, including in Moscow. Answering the question about the city. To my point of view, the power of the global city and involvement, impact on economic relations is not determined only by economic index, but also by a number of headquarters of transnational corporations. Leaders are Tokyo, London, New York, Paris, where more than 50% of headquarters of largest world corporations are located. Renault has already made its choice. For example, this year, the largest innovation hub of Renault, the third in the world, is located in Moscow. And Moscow is the first platform for starting the global model of Renault, and it's a pilot market for testing many innovation areas. In particular, we have an agreement on the Center of Development, where all the solutions will be tested. Connected cars, which I mentioned, which is implemented by us together with the government of Moscow, and positioning of a car, paying of parking, with the billboards of with the boards of the car. This is what we do together with the transportation authorities. I will be a devil's advocate. It's great to have a client, a large city with more than 15 million population, and to sell your product, but it doesn't mean that you have to produce, you have to manufacture your products here in the same city. Why do you have to produce your products in one of the most expensive cities in Europe? Probably the answer would be very similar to for any investor. First of all, it's an access to human capital. Moscow is number second on the quality of the human resource and ranking of European cities of the future. And who is on the first place? I believe that it's London. Yeah, it's London. And the headquarters of some transnational corporations are also moving their headquarters to London because of this reason. This is reason number one, and we do a lot together with the government of Moscow related with the sphere of engineering, of training of engineering personnel. And at the very beginning, we had a very interesting discussion with Vladimir regarding the requirements to the employees. We were talking about salary. We have an agreement with the government of Moscow. We have obligations on attraction of young specialists to our jobs, creation of jobs, providing for opportunities of many educational institutions. We have more than 10 agreements with Moscow educational institutions, and we involve young people to investment solutions. How many people to have 5,000 employees? An engineering center has about 100, 150. And the second area, which is also very important for any investor, regardless of its jurisdiction, is taxation regulation. And in this case, Moscow provides unique, diversified mechanism depending on the criteria, on the obligations which investor undertakes. Volume of production, volumes of investment, volumes of export, and other requirements. And thanks to our transparent and all-known criteria, we have certain access to Moscow support. And reason number three is probably legislation, which is also very important, because for investors it's important to have stable, transparent situation. And at the same time, in spite of the requirements to transparency, it should be flexible and adaptive to all the challenges. We are on the threshold of the fourth industrial revolution. That is why we have to be flexible, and Moscow reacts very positively on all the requirements. And I would like to give the floor to Alexander Tsibulnikov, Vice President of Sberbank, Chairman of the Moscow Bank of Public Joint Stock Company Sberbank. Vyacheslav, you are probably in a privileged position. As Renault, according to their opinion, you work in the richest and most advanced, educated cities of Europe. Nevertheless, which advantages and disadvantages do you see how your business looks in comparison with other regional banks of Sberbank? From the point of view of focuses, what are disadvantages of work in Moscow from the point of view of competition, etc.?
Indeed, the Moscow market is among the most interesting in all respects, but at the same time, it's one of the most competitive. In Moscow, we were thinking why Moscow was different from other regions, like three features of the city, and we found out that Moscow today has a self-sufficient budget. Moscow does not need extra money. It has enough investment resources. Secondly, Moscow thinks of itself as a leader of transformation revolution, because today the digitalization budget of the city is among the biggest, nearing 600 billion rubles. And thirdly, Moscow, both Moscow city administration and Moscow residents have high requirements to the level of the service. And when we analyzed it, so they look like us. We are like them. So we have quite a lot of resources. At Sberbank, we consider ourselves leaders of digital transformation, and Muscovites have quite high requirements to us for service, and we challenge ourselves as well. So it's an interesting plan. The Russian Fund of Direct Investments feels itself as the state planning agency, but you feel like Moscow. Well, it's not exactly a quality relation between a bank and a customer. It's partnership that should provide not competition but synergy. Once again, in this regard, high competition not only with a big number of financial institutions here in Moscow, but with the city itself in delivery of digital services and all the rest. A good competition in the good sense, that means that provides for another requirement for us to be able to conduct this competition. But if we get back to the investment climate, we were saying that the financial infrastructure is an element of it. Whether it is the most important or less important, it's important enough to set up an investment climate, and the convenient services and affordability of capital is key. And getting back to high competition, we say that today the service should be comfortable. People have to be comfortable with the service. The same is true in the automotive industry, and the banking industry is no exception, because the automation level is pretty high. And smaller and medium enterprises, they open up an account at a tax service, register at a tax service, and next day gets a few proposals from banks, because banks are going digital now, so that has a good impact on the financial infrastructure. And as far as the capital affordability, and the cost of resources that we provide and risks, the competitive environment plays a big role here, and we can see today that the attitude toward SME has changed over years. From whom? The attitude from bankers, from the financial infrastructure. So it is one of the key points now, because it was a leftover principle before, but now this is one of the points of focus, not just because the president of the country considers it a focus, but it's income of the banks, and it's a good way to diversify risks. A question: isn't it just because the other financial segments are shrinking? Answer: we don't think so. Our portfolio is diversified, by the smaller and medium enterprises income has been growing in Moscow and in other cities. And as far as affordability, various programs are important, both at the Moscow level and at the federal level. So we interact a lot, and businesses need to play in a good way with all that stuff, to have all programs related to tax benefits, to subsidizing of interest rates. We have to integrate all those projects together, and that makes it possible for us to move on in terms of capital affordability very fast, like to 8.5 from the I'm talking about Moscow and about the federal agencies. So it's not us to assess the affordability of capital. and the convenience. It's our customers who have to say that, but we feel that we're trying to fight for that market. We're trying to, again, in a good competitive environment, and that all is pretty optimistic in terms of the feedback from our customers. And there should be feedback from our customers. Thanks, Vyacheslav. And the floor goes to Frank Schauf. Frank has been working in Russia for many years, and he is Director General of the Association of European Businesses, an organization that encompasses a few hundred foreign capital companies operating in Russia. Frank, my question to you, how do you feel here in Moscow in terms of work? How do you benchmark Moscow versus other Russian regions where your companies operate and versus global leaders that are Moscow competitors? Thank you. We are the major representation office of foreign investors in Russia, and our potential towards Moscow, our view to Moscow is different than to the whole of Russia. I would say that we have been working here for 25 years now, and Moscow has significantly changed over the years. The city administration has changed a lot over the years, and we can see a more transparent access for our members. And over the years, there is a good dialogue between various departments of the city administration. For instance, investment policy, municipal infrastructure, tourism, and so on. It has never been the case before, and this has an impact on the perception of the city by foreign investors. If we look at what has been mentioned, for instance, Moscow is an expensive city. If we benchmark Moscow versus Europe or other cities, yes, Moscow used to be a very expensive city before. In the end of last decade, it is not as expensive as before today. Yes, the Moscow city administration has done the utmost to deflate ruble. But on the other side, the infrastructure has developed a lot, as well as the investments, and the city now is much more open than 10 to 15 years before. And if we say something about the quality of life, I used to live in London, in Berlin. I wouldn't say that life quality for me as a foreigner in Moscow is worse than in those cities. So I think that because how many years have you been living in Moscow? 12 years now. We have to say that there is a big market, there is a big purchasing power of the population, and a high level of science and technology here. So we have objective, evident pros of Moscow. But if we mean production, Reno is one of rare examples that operate on the territory in Moscow City, already invested in the 90s. At that time, the framework agreements were different for investment than today, and we were able to see that Reno competitors have invested money into production facilities in Moscow in recent months. Daimler Works was launched in April. So the city environment is interacting with the environment of Moscow region, and we shouldn't only look at as a city that formally ends at the Moscow Ring Road. It goes beyond Moscow as a city. 2 points as far as improvements are concerned. What has to be improved? We invited agencies doing mice business here, and we spent a 2-day conference, and they were looking at Moscow. And I would say that they were amazed by Moscow and its opportunities. Many of them have never visited the city, and it was a big news for them. However, they were very transparent, but they had issues with visa issuing. So if Moscow wants to develop this side, we need to take some action with regard to visa issuing, because it's hard for those people who has never been to a country that you need to apply for a visa. It's quite a difficult thing, and they have encountered issues. And as far as I understand you, today it's not the case in St. Petersburg and not the case in the Far East. So these are some border territories, but still, last year we saw the FIFA World Cup, that the simplified visa regime was working at that time, and we have to develop that situation. We have to make an impact. I know that it's not the Moscow city level, it's a federal level, but Moscow as a city may impact federal things. The second point is migration. As the Association of European Businesses, we have many foreign managers. They have to deal to pay a great deal of their time to migration regulations. And there is an interesting case that highly skilled foreign employees have been, well, the formalization of documents for highly skilled foreign nationals have been relocated now. It's the same in Germany, but that process was even made harder. So highly skilled and top managers now have to go from Moscow to Sakharovo, which is 50 kilometers away from Moscow, because it was not the case before. They saw "Welcome to Moscow" sign, and then they have to formalize their life. They have to go to Sakharovo now, and it's not very pleasant conditions, I would say, where they have to deal with such things. And it's not only the question of the city, but the city can have an impact on that. Berlin, as the capital city of Germany, could have an impact on federal regulations, and I think that we have to consider this, because these are among those things that impact Moscow image for foreign investors. The last point I want to mention is a question which is very important for foreign investors. This is what Moscow cannot have an impact on, but still it is important for investment climate, which is sanctions. We saw sanctions from 2015. European companies may work with those sanctions. They were introduced by European authorities, but over the last 2 years, we were able to see that American sanctions, which are first and foremost are against Russian companies and Russian economy, has a big impact on European companies. I mean secondary sanctions, and this is one of the things that that contributes a lot to those discussions related to the concept of Moscow as an international financial center. So it's a huge topic that does matter for foreign investors. Thank you. Frank, a quick question to you. Do you see any competitive disadvantages of Moscow versus other regions of Russia, where foreign companies come to Russia and they opt for other regions than Moscow? Why so? Or does Moscow have a chance to retain those investors here? You saw the figures. The figures are not too bad with regard to investment attraction. And again, this is a natural thing that over the development of direct foreign investments, they not only go to the capital city of a country. Over time, they have a regional expansion. And it's hard to say in the end why investors decide to Moscow or to regions. There are many things impacting that decision, but if we take a look at a general investment regime, I wouldn't say it is worse than in any regions of Russia. So yeah, the entire roundtable we were trying to find out that it's better than in other regions. So colleagues, we're nearing our completion. There is a third voting round, so please log on to the application once again to the survey section, and your code is 9387. 9387. The question is, please define the most important factors on how to increase the investment attractiveness of modern mega policies. You may select up to 3 answers. While we're voting, Vladimir, could you get back to the selectivity of the city policy to types of investors and projects, already existing and new ones? Well, we're not setting a task to squeeze certain investors out of the city, but our task is to increase effectiveness of land plot usage. Today, we have been actively working with our integrated industrial development department, and given that approach and given that tool, we are going to incentivize land users to develop their plots of land, to place new production facilities there, or any other ways to increase effectiveness and density on that acreage, because we can now see that many industrial clusters now are wastelands, to call a spade a spade. So it's neither a territorial development driver nor a look of a modern city. So we're going to
provide all necessary conditions for that, for their survival. On the other hand, if something doesn't happen with the territory, we will again take measures in order to find a new owner of this land plot. Are there any measures which motivate, which stimulate? Yes, there are such measures. For example, today we have a documentation regarding 5 territories, comprehensive development of 5 territories, and we provide them with the rights for 6 months. They have to prepare the concept of development, of this territory. If this doesn't happen, we initiate these procedures by ourselves, and in case if that the right owners do not want to develop the territory, we will find other investments. You will purchase, yes, it will be a forced, it will be an obligatory purchase of land plot by us. It's not a limitation, it's probably a measure of stimulation, a measure of motivation to develop the territories, because we finished our discussion on discussing specifics of the city. We do not have a lot of territories, and when the territory which we have is used in a very inefficient manner, it's a factor which is very serious for us. At the same time, active investors who want to develop these territories are in search of the territory, and we have the results of the voting. And the first place belongs to providing of favorable urban environment. Previously, you did not. In the previous question, you did not pay such attention. You did not focus on that, on this indicator, on this factor. Number 2 is legislative basis, predictability, transparency, and long-term validity of legislations for business, staff and scientific potential, which is another good news for this city, attracting headquarters of the leading companies. That's probably Tatiana voted for that, who said that all the respectable cities, in particular New York, attract the headquarters of international corporations, which is very important for all the businesses. Any of participants would like to comment on this voting? No? In this case, we are about to finish our session. I would like to thank all the speakers for interesting discussion. Thank you for your attention and your interest. Thank you and have a good day.